Okay, so today we're going to talk about the 3 most common injuries that you could experience while hiking or backpacking. These are going to consist of falling injuries, so we have to worry about short and long bone fractures. So for those, we're going to be able to splint them. The other one we're worried about from slips and falls is going to be cervical related issues. So I'm going to teach you guys how to create a C-collar using a SAM splint today, which you should already have because you need that in order to splint and immobilize this short and long bone. And then the third injury is going to be any scrapes or cuts that are not massively hemorrhaging, right? See, these are, you fell, maybe you cut yourself up pretty good, maybe you got cut against a branch or something of that nature, so it's not to the extent where you need a wound pack or apply a tourniquet. All you need to do is be able to apply direct pressure and be able to bandage it and keep it sterile. That way the environment that you're in, whether that be water, dirt, mud, dust, does not get into that wound and contaminate it and cause an infection. Pressure dressings, pressure bandages. This is a injury that does have bleeding, but it's not to the extent where it's an extreme hemorrhage to where we need to wound pack a junctional site or start tourniqueting some form of an extremity, whether that be arm or leg. Instead, maybe this is like a gash, a cut, something of that nature, not to the point where Matt's necessarily going to bleed out. This is something that can be controlled with direct pressure, but maybe we need to keep moving and we don't have time to sit here and hold for 3 to 5 minutes, or he doesn't have the time to do that. And once the bleeding were to stop, he's going to need to keep that covered, especially if we're out on the trail or something, because we don't want any foreign substances to get into that wound, because that's going to increase his chances of infection. So therefore, we're going to be using a pressure dressing. We have 2 types here in our backpack. We have an Israeli bandage and we have a North American Rescue pressure bandage. We're going to use both. So this one just utilizes Velcro with no cleat, and you'll see on the inside there's a gauze pad, right? So what we would do, go ahead and lay your leg out. Let's say he got slashed right across the top of his quad. I'd be placing the gauze pad on top of that, and then I would be stretching this out to the best of my ability to get it very tight, because we want it to control all form of bleed. And we're going to continue stretching. And then it has Velcro that'll attach, and then it also has clips here like teeth, and you can just hook that right up into the side, so when we need to keep moving, this is not going to come off. And this is going to control bleeding. This is also going to prevent any foreign substance from getting in. The next one we have is very similar. This is a typical Israeli bandage. So instead of Velcro, it utilizes teeth, but it also utilizes a cleat. Okay, so this is very, very, very similar. Also has the gauze pad. You put that on top of the injury site. Here, we're going to pull this out. We're going to stretch this, create as much tension as possible. We put this through the cleat here, and now this is where people goof up. They think that they need to continue wrapping in the same direction. Instead, we're going to stretch and go over the top of the cleat. And what that does is that allows downward pressure, which simulates direct pressure, as if we were to use our hands to control that bleed. And the whole time, I'm continuously stretching. So I want to be able to get this as tight as possible. And then this one uses the same method. It has teeth, so I hook into here, and then I can hook into there. And now I don't have to worry about this coming off. We have direct pressure on that wound site. It's a sterile piece of gauze, and we don't have to worry about foreign substances getting inside that wound. Okay, so now we're going to talk about short bone immobilization, i.e. he either broke his wrist, maybe he broke one of the bones in the lower arm going up to the upper arm, anything of that nature. What we're going to use, again, we're going to use a SAM splint. So we have a couple different ways we could use this depending on where he fractured, whether it be like separation of a joint or he completely separated, broke a bone. If it's an open fracture, again, if there's any massive hemorrhage that's involved in that, maybe an arterial or a venous bleed, we would need to treat that with a hemorrhage control, i.e. tourniquet on the extremity. But for this situation, we'll say it's a closed fracture, not an open fracture. One example we have is, let's say his arm's out like this. I could place his hand in here if this was his wrist or his hand, and then we could take like a medical bandage. We could wrap this all the way over the top, and you can either self-adhere or then you can go over it with medical tape. If you don't have medical tape, I know like when I go backpacking, I like to carry duct tape with me, so duct tape would work as well. Another example that we have is for the wrist as well, is he places his hand here, and now I roll this up, and now he has a place for his fingers to rest over the top. And what I would do is I would pack gauze into here, or if I had an extra one of these, I could just use that, and that creates padding support. So that way this isn't tilting like this, dipping in. It maintains stabilization. And then the same concept would apply. I could use a self-adhering medical bandage all the way over the top. And if it doesn't self-adhere, you could use medical tape or duct tape to immobilize this area. If it was, let's say like a radial or something, I can get this to hook into here, and what I would do is obviously apply gentle pressure, bend this into place, create a pocket for his elbow, and then this can come in and I can start form fitting around his arm here. And then if I had another one, I could do the same thing up on the front, and I might need to roll it in because this is going to be a shorter side because of the pec coming forward. And then again, wrap it, self-adhering bandage, and then utilize tape over the top of that. That way this doesn't come apart. So these are a couple different ways where you can do short bone immobilization. It's very simple, and that's why I like carrying these SAM splints. They fit in the backpack very easily. Whether you're staging them in a configuration, something like this, like that, fold it over again, or the way I do it, I like to roll these up nice and tight like that, and that doesn't take up much space at all, and they're multi-use. All right, so we're going to talk about C-spine, cervical collar, anything that could be an injury related to the upper portion of the neck or the upper part of the back. So we're going to need to immobilize that. This could have occurred because Matt was out hiking and he was near some water. He slipped, fell, landed on his back, potentially hit the back of his neck. So we're going to assume that he has C-spine trauma. Therefore, we need to immobilize that and use a cervical collar or a makeshift cervical collar. So in our backpack, we have a SAM splint, and this can be used for immobilizing fractures, long bone and short bone, but this can also be used as a cervical collar. Now, if we were to use an actual cervical collar, it's much larger than the SAM splint. This is a multi-use, this is single use. This is a driven person for someone's neck. This can be used again for short and long bone fractures as well as cervical related issues. So we're going to opt to use this because it takes up less real estate in our backpack. So Matt's going to lay supine for me, and we are going to assume he has some form of cervical trauma. So first things first, we're going to open up our SAM splint, and if he's conscious, great. If he's not, don't do the head tilt chin lift maneuver because we're worried about the moment we come here and here, we're moving the cervical. So instead, we're going to lay him flat however he landed, and all we're going to do is we're come behind the jaw, and we're going to do a jaw thrust, and we're always going to do that just to make sure his tongue doesn't occlude his airway and to make sure there's nothing that's going to be blocking the airway, such as any form of fluid, saliva, vomit, or any broken teeth falling into the back of the airway. If we did experience that, there's a whole method we could do to remove that, but that's not going to be for today's video. So we're going to talk about this. So I don't want to raise it and pick up his head, because if I do this, I'm moving his neck. So instead, once I did this and I opened, I'm just sliding this underneath right here. I'm going to form fit it to his neck here, not too tight, because I don't want to cut off those blood vessels on the back of his neck, nor do I want to occlude his carotid arteries on either side. And when I come across and I make my bow, I don't want that to start deviating his trachea. So instead, I come here and I'll use my hands just like this. Okay? And then you can pull this part up to hold that in place. It's tight enough, but can you still breathe?
Yep.
Can you talk?
Yep.
So if he was conscious, I don't have to insert any type of airway adjunct for him or start mechanically ventilating him. So he can breathe on his own, and he is able to communicate to me. Now, we wouldn't do this, but for example, Matt, with this on, how well can you move your head?
Not very.
Side to side, right? It's a little awkward.
Yep.
Right? Now, moving it up and down, that's my job to tell him, hey, Matt, we're going to wait for people to come get us. Do me a favor. Just get comfortable. Don't move. Don't move your head. Okay? Because I'm worried about causing more cervical damage. And now a lot of people are like, okay, cool. He has a broken neck or whatever it may be. Maybe it's not that big of a concern. Here's what we're primarily worried about. Is in between cervical 3 and cervical 4, you have a nerve called the phrenic nerve. This nerve is what controls and activates the diaphragm to contract. If we damage that nerve in between C3 and C4, Matt no longer is going to be able to breathe.